Dear students, let's begin with the NCERT reading of Class 12, Chapter 12, Ecosystem. If you're not subscribed to the channel yet, please do so. Let's begin with the reading. An ecosystem can be visualized as a functional unit of nature where living organisms interact among themselves and also with the surrounding physical environment. Ecosystem varies greatly in size from a small pond to a large forest or a sea. Many ecologists regard the entire biosphere as a global ecosystem, as a composite of all local ecosystems on Earth. Since this system is too much big and complex to be studied at one time, it is convenient to divide it into two basic categories, namely the terrestrial and the aquatic. Forest, grassland, and desert are some examples of terrestrial ecosystems. Pond, lake, wetland, river, and estuary are some examples of aquatic ecosystems. Crop fields and an aquarium may also be considered as man-made ecosystems. We will first look at the structure of ecosystem in order to appreciate the input, that is productivity, transfer of energy, that is food chain, web, nutrient cycling, and the output, that is degradation and energy loss. We will also look at the relationships, cycles, chains, webs that are created as a result of this energy flows within the system and their interrelationship. 12.1 Ecosystem Structure and Function. In earlier classes, you have looked at the various components of the environment, abiotic and biotic. You studied how the individual biotic and abiotic factors affected each other and their surrounding. Let us look at these components in a more integrated manner and see how the flow of energy takes place within these components of the ecosystem. Interaction of biotic and abiotic components result in a physical structure that is characteristic for each type of ecosystem. Identification and enumeration of plant and animal species of an ecosystem gives its species composition. Vertical distribution of different species occupying different levels is called stratification. For example, trees occupy top vertical strata or layer of a forest, shrubs the second, and herbs and grasses occupy the bottom layers. The components of the ecosystem are seen to function as a unit when you consider the following aspects. Number 1, productivity. Number 2, decomposition. Number 3, energy flow. And number 4, nutrient cycling. To understand the ethos of an aquatic ecosystem, let us take a small pond as an example. This is fairly a self-sustainable unit and rather simple example that explains even the complex interactions that exist in an aquatic ecosystem. A pond is a shallow water body in which all the above mentioned four basic components of an ecosystem are well exhibited. The abiotic component is the water with all the dissolved inorganic and organic substances and the rich soil deposit at the bottom of the pond. The solar input, the cycle of temperature, day length, and other climatic conditions regulate the rate of function of the entire pond. The autotrophic components include the phytoplankton, some algae, and the floating, submerged, and marginal plants found at the edges. The consumers are represented by the zooplankton, the free swimming and bottle dwelling forms. The decomposers are the fungi, bacteria, and flagellates, especially abundant in the bottom of the pond. This system performs all the functions of any ecosystem and of the biosphere as a whole. That is, conversion of inorganic into organic material with the help of radiant energy of the sun by the autotrophs, consumption of the autotrophs by heterotrophs, decomposition and mineralization of the dead matter to release them back for reuse by the autotrophs. These events are repeated over and over again. There is unidirectional movement of energy towards the higher trophic levels and its dissipation and loss as heat to the environment. 12.2 Productivity. A constant input of solar energy is the basic requirement for any ecosystem to function and sustain. Primary production is defined as the amount of biomass or organic matter produced per unit area over a time period by plants during photosynthesis. It is expressed in terms of weight or energy. The rate of biomass production is called productivity. It is expressed in terms of gram per square per year or kilocalorie meter square per year. To compare the productivity of different ecosystems, it can be divided into gross primary productivity and net primary productivity. Gross primary productivity of an ecosystem is the rate of production of organic matter during photosynthesis. A considerable amount of GPP is utilized by plants in respiration. Gross primary productivity minus respiration losses is the net primary productivity. GPP minus R is equal to NPP. Net productivity is the available biomass for the consumption of heterotrophs, that is herbivores and decomposers. Secondary productivity is defined as the rate of formation of new organic matter by consumers. Primary productivity depends on the plant species inhabiting a particular area. It also depends on a variety of environmental factors, availability of nutrients, and photosynthetic capacity of plants. Therefore, it varies in different types of ecosystems. The annual net primary productivity of the whole biosphere is approximately 170 billion tons, this dry weight of organic matter. Of this, despite occupying about 70% of the surface, the productivity of the oceans are only 55 billion tons. Rest, of course, is on land. Discuss the main reason for the low productivity of ocean with your teacher. 12.3 Decomposition. You may, you may have heard of the earthworm being referred to as farmer's friend. This is so because they help in the breakdown of complex organic matter as well as in loosening of the soil. Similarly, decomposers break down complex organic matter into inorganic substances like carbon dioxide, water, and nutrients, and the process is called decomposition. Dead plant remains such as leaves, barks, flowers, and dead remains of animals, including fecal matter, constitute detritus, which is the raw material for decomposition. The important steps in the process of decomposition are fragmentation, leaching, catabolism, humification, and mineralization. Detritivores, for example, earthworm, break down detritus into small particles. This process is called fragmentation. By the process of leaching, water-soluble inorganic nutrients go down into the soil horizon and get precipitated as unavailable salts. Bacteria and fungal enzymes degrade detritus into simpler inorganic substances. This process is called as catabolism. It is important to note that all the above steps in decomposition operate simultaneously on the detritus. It is shown in figure 12.1. Humification and mineralization occur during decomposition in the soil. Humification leads to accumulation of a dark colored amorphous substance called humus that is highly resistant to microbial action and undergoes decomposition at an extremely slow rate. Being colloidal in nature, it serves as a reservoir of nutrients. The humus is further degraded by some microbes and release of inorganic nutrients occur by the process known as mineralization. Decomposition is largely an oxygen requiring process. The rate of decomposition is controlled by chemical composition of detritus and climatic factors. In a particular climatic condition, decomposition rate is slower if detritus is rich in lignin and chitin, and quicker if detritus is rich in nitrogen and water soluble substances like sugars. Temperature and soil moisture are the most important climatic factors that regulate decomposition through their effects on the activities of soil microbes. Warm and moist environment favor decomposition, whereas low temperature and anaerobiosis inhibit decomposition, resulting in buildup of organic materials. 12.4 Energy flow. Except for the deep sea hydrothermal ecosystem, sun is the only source of energy for all ecosystems on Earth. Of the incident solar radiation, less than 50% of it is photosynthetically active radiation. We know that plants and photosynthetic bacteria fix sun's radiant energy to make food from simple inorganic materials. Plant capture only 2 to 10% of the PAR, and this small amount of energy sustains the entire living world. So it is very important to know how the solar energy captured by plants flows through different organisms of an ecosystem. All organisms are dependent for their food on producers, either directly or indirectly. So you find unidirectional flow of energy from the sun to producer and then to consumers. Further, ecosystems are not exempt from the second law of thermodynamics. They need a constant supply of energy to synthesize the molecules they require to counteract the universal tendency towards increasing disorderliness. The green plant in the ecosystem are called producers. In a terrestrial ecosystem, major producers are herbaceous and woody plants. Likewise, producers in an aquatic ecosystem are various species like phytoplankton, algae, and higher plants. You have read about the food chains and webs that exist in nature. Starting from the plants or producer, food chains or rather webs are formed such that an animal feeds on a plant or on other animal and in turn is food for another. The chain or web is formed because of this interdependency. No energy that is trapped into an organism remains in it forever. The energy trapped by the producer, hence, is either passed on to the consumer or the organism dies. Death of the organism is the beginning of the detritus food chain or web. All animals depend on plants directly or indirectly for their food needs. They are hence called consumers and also heterotrophs. If they feed on the producers, the plants, they are called primary consumers, and if the animal eat other animals, which in turn eats the plant or their produce, they are called secondary consumers. Likewise, you could have tertiary consumers too. Obviously, the primary consumers will be herbivores. Some common herbivores are insects, birds, and mammals in terrestrial ecosystem and mollusks in aquatic ecosystem. The consumers that feed on these herbivores are carnivores, or more correctly, primary carnivores. Though secondary consumers, those animals that depend on the primary carnivores for food are labeled secondary carnivores. A simple grazing food chain is depicted below. It is grass is the producer. It is fed by the primary consumer, that is goat. On goat, man feeds, which is the secondary consumer. The detritus food chain begins with dead organic matter. It is made up of decomposers, which are heterotrophic organisms, mainly fungi and bacteria. They meet their energy and nutrient requirements by degrading dead organic matter or detritus. These are also known as saprotrophs. Decomposers secrete digestive enzymes that break down dead and waste material into simple inorganic materials, which are subsequently absorbed by them. In an aquatic ecosystem, GFC is the major conduit for energy flow. As against this, in a terrestrial ecosystem, a much larger fraction of energy flows through the detritus food chain than through the GFC. Detritus food chain may be connected with the grazing food chain at some levels. Some of the organisms of DFC are prey to the GFC animals, and in a natural ecosystem, some animals like cockroaches, crows, etc., are omnivores. These are natural interconnection of food chains, make it a food web. How would you classify human beings? Organisms occupy a place in the natural surroundings or in a community according to their feeding relationship with other organisms. Based on the source of their nutrition or food, organisms occupy a specific place in the food chain that is known as their trophic level. Producers belong to the first trophic level, herbivores, that is primary consumers, to the second, and carnivores, that is secondary consumer, to the third. Examples are given over here in the diagrammatic representation of trophic levels in an ecosystem. You can have a look. The important point to note is that the amount of energy decreases at successive trophic levels. When a new organism dies, it is converted to detritus or dead biomass that serves as an energy source for decomposers. Organisms at each trophic level depend on those at the lower trophic level for their energy demands. Each trophic level has a certain mass of living material at a particular time called as a standing crop. The standing crop is measured as the mass of living organisms, that is biomass, or the number in a unit area. The biomass of a species is expressed in terms of fresh or dry weight. Measurement of biomass in terms of dry weight is more accurate. The number of trophic levels in the grazing food chain is restricted as a transfer of energy follows 10% law. Only 10% of the energy is transferred to each trophic level from the lower trophic level. In nature, it is possible to have so many levels: producer, herbivore, primary carnivore, secondary carnivore in the grazing food chain. As shown in figure 12.3, you can have a look. 12.5 Ecological Pyramids. You must be familiar with the shape of a pyramid. The base of a pyramid is broad and it narrows towards the apex. One gets a similar shape whether you express the food or energy relationship between organisms at different trophic levels. This relationship is expressed in terms of number, biomass, or energy. The base of each pyramid represents the producers or the first trophic level, while the apex represents tertiary or top level consumer. The three types of ecological pyramids that are usually studied are A. Pyramid of number, B. Pyramid of biomass, and C. Pyramid of energy. For detail, see figure 12.4 A, B, C, and D. So it is shown over here. You can have a look. Any calculations of energy content, biomass, or numbers has to include all organisms at that trophic level. No generalizations we make will be true if we take only a few individuals at any trophic level into account. Also, a given organism may occupy more than one trophic level simultaneously. One must remember that the trophic level represents a functional level, not a species as such. A given species may occupy more than one trophic level in the same ecosystem at the same time. For example, a sparrow is primary consumer when it eats seed, fruit, peas, and a secondary consumer when it eats insect and worms. In most ecosystems, all the pyramids of number, of energy, and biomass are upright. That is, producers are more in more in number and biomass in the herbivores, and herbivores are more in number and biomass in the carnivores. Also, energy at lower trophic level is always more than at a higher level. There are exceptions to this generalization. If you were to count the number of insects feeding on a big tree, what kind of pyramid would you get? Now, add an estimate of the number of small birds depending on insects, as also the number of larger birds eating the smaller. Draw the shape you would get. The pyramid of biomass in sea is generally inverted because the biomass of fishes far exceeds that of phytoplankton. Pyramid of energy is always upright, can never be inverted, because when energy flows from a particular trophic level to the next trophic level, some energy is always lost as heat at each step. Each bar in the energy pyramid indicates the amount of energy present at each trophic level in a given time or annually per unit area. However, there are certain limitations of ecological pyramids, such as it does not take into account the same species belonging to two or more trophic levels. It assumes a simple food chain, something that almost never exists in nature. It does not accommodate a food web. Moreover, saprophytes are not given any place in ecological pyramids, even though they play a vital role in the ecosystem. Students, with this, we are done with the reading of Chapter 12 Ecosystem. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.